Dr. Jim Porter, it's honestly such an honor to work with you, and it's really just such a pleasure to get to know you throughout, your expeditions and experiments. And yeah, I'm Desiree Tavera, Executive Director and founder of Faraway Projects, and we're a fiscal sponsor and nonprofit incubator. So we help initiatives like Jim's roll out in the world and do the good work. Jim, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes, so I'm Dr. Jim Porter. I'm Meg's Professor of Ecology at the University of Georgia, and I've worked in the Florida Keys for almost 50 years. And so when Desiree contacted me from far away to say that she could find support for some of our work down there, I jumped at that opportunity. So what I'd like to do for the Volo Foundation right now is to just share screen, tell you a little bit about what we did down there, what we found, and what we would like help to continue. So I've been working on coral reefs in the Florida Keys now for almost half a century. And I've been involved in monitoring, especially with the EPA project. And what we've found over the time that we've worked down there is that coral started out looking beautifully. And by 2000, this is a reef off of Key West, they had declined substantially. And it is our data that showed that coral reefs were declining in the Florida Keys and around the world. Since 1996, Florida has lost 50% of all of its coral. And elkhorn coral, that magnificent branching elkhorn that you see there, was once the commonest coral in Florida. And since then, it's lost almost 80%. And our work helped to add it to the endangered species list. So we looked for the cause for elkhorn coral decline. And what we determined was that it was a human fecal coliform bacteria, such as you see here. And that's the same group of bacteria that caused beach closures in the Florida Keys and elsewhere around the US. And in Key West, it caused the um, closed down the swim around Key West competition. So it was time to get the word out. We knew that the solution was going to be to upgrade wastewater treatment plants in the Keys. And you'll see here that the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary was very pleased with that information. So here's the NBC Nightly News on that advice.
From NBC News.
Dramatic pictures, time lapse of the destruction of elkhorn coral off the Florida Keys. 1/3 gone in just the last 6 years. A bacteria produces what's commonly called white pox disease. Dr. Porter's research paper points to what environmentalists and resource managers have been fearing for a number of years as the population in the Florida Keys has exploded.
This is clearly a smoking gun for us as far as the coral reef health in the Florida Keys that we've been looking for.
So based on the advice that we gave them, they upgraded the wastewater treatment plant in Key West, and the reef went from what you see above, and by 2020, the corals were coming back. The point is, coral reefs are living things, and if we can just treat them better, they can survive. The other thing that came from this work is that we knew that we could make a difference. Local action really mattered to try to help protect coral reefs. So with that background, Faraway in 2023 helped us fund a citizen science water quality project in Key Largo. And the idea is we took enthusiastic scuba divers with us to the Keys to investigate the relationship between water quality and coral survival. However, when we got there, we pivoted immediately because of these extraordinary temperatures that we found. We measured off Key Largo a sea surface temperature of 101.1 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the highest temperature ever measured in seawater, ever, anywhere. And there it was. We were right in the middle of this. So this was the reef when we got down there. It was normal, the nice brown coral coloration that you see there, and things were going very well. Then the heat began, and here's an example of partial bleaching. You see in the center The white part is the bleach part, and then a little bit of color. And this partial bleaching is important because it lets us identify which corals were sick and which corals were healthy. But then by the end of the summer, and Desiree, you were down there, so you know those temperatures, everything had turned white out. And a lot of the corals actually that we were looking at had died. Now, the thing about this is that the mortality was very high this summer, but it was not 100%. Some corals survived. And all of the stations that we had visited, we marked with absolute precision with GPS coordinates. So we can go back and we have thousands of colonies that we had monitored healthy, then bleached, and then next year we could go and look for their survival. So the idea is to get back to the Florida Keys and try and find out which of these corals survived. So, the answer, the question is, which corals did survive, and can we identify a genetic trait among the survivors which confers thermal resistance to heat? And that's the way we're going to be able to find which corals we should try to grow in aquaria or replant onto the reef. Now, one of the interesting things is that if you look at the kinds of images we produced, you can see one in the upper right, one in the upper left. This, of course, is a healthy coral, and there's one that's diseased. We believe that we should be able to use artificial intelligence to survey our different montages easily, and thus cut by a phenomenal amount of time it's going to take to identify which individual corals have survived. So what we want to do is to return to the Florida Keys and locate the survivors. And then maybe they could hold the keys to a sustainable future for all coral reefs, and certainly for those in the Florida Keys. And with help from the Volo Foundation, we can return, and faraway projects could once again get us in there to have boots on the ground, well, fins in the air, to get some good science done to help protect our coral reefs. Thank you so much for coming along on this trip. Let me stop screen share and get your reaction.
Yeah, Jim, thank you so much for sharing that. A couple of questions that I had right away were like, over what time period were you monitoring and seeing these types of changes in the water?
Well, for the temperature, that just occurred this year. We've been monitoring the Keys from 1980.
Yeah.
We've never seen anything like this. This is outside of what most people would say is even oceanography. No ocean scientist in the world predicted that we would measure temperatures like that. It's unheard of.
Yeah.
So this is part of a problem with climate change. And we have to find the corals that can tolerate these elevated temperatures. And we have the extraordinary documentation based on Faraway's funding to allow us to return to the exact individual colony and find out whether it survived.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think the most fascinating part is that you can actually go see the diseased coral versus like the resilient coral. What are some of the strategies that you have to preserve and even, support the resilient coral?
Well, there are a number of groups down there in the Keys that are working on this. Some groups, the Coral Restoration Foundation, actually took corals off of the reef and brought them into aquaria on land in air-conditioned buildings so that they could keep the corals cool, with the idea maybe we can move them back out. And there's another group from the University of Hawaii that's cryo-freezing these corals with the ideas that we can bring the adults back after these thermally high temperatures have lowered. But the problem is to scale. In order to get a reef to return, not just an individual coral, we need to replicate the success of the few individuals that have these high heat tolerant genes. There's actually a protein called a heat shock protein, and corals that have the genetic capability of producing the heat shock protein are much more likely to survive these bleaching events. So that's one of the things that we really do want to look for. And we want this to be at scale. We don't just want corals, we want coral reefs.
Thank you so much for that, Jim. Yeah, it's really mind-boggling that so many of these initiatives from, Hawaii to locally are really galvanizing around the climate destabilization that we're seeing and these record temperatures. What I find really fascinating is how you're using technology to advance the geolocation and the specificity, because it is really easy to get very doom and gloom and high level about how bad all of this is, but being able to specifically pinpoint where all of the hope spots are is really fascinating. How did you start integrating AI and the larger picture of technology into the work that you're doing?
Well, thanks. Yeah, university communities are fun places to be because everybody's doing something different. And I ran across computer people who were doing AI, and I showed them the same images that I just showed you, and they said, "Wait a minute, we can get our computers to do all of the work for you." So I said, "Oh, I like that." But on the broader issue, for the last, I'd say 5 years or so, we've been considering a concept called resilient reefs. And those are reefs which seem to be doing a little better under the climate change scenario that's been occurring. Maybe they have some cooler deep water coming up, we're not sure. But what we're also would like to do is to take satellite pictures of reefs. And if a reef bleaches and turns white, that's something a satellite can actually catch. So we could use AI not just at the individual coral level, but at the remote sensing level to identify resilient reefs.
That's
And the other extraordinary thing about this is that it's a field of science that all biologists are now involved in, but no biologist ever thought would ever occur. And it's a new field called assisted evolution.
amazing.
Can we do natural selection or unnatural selection to select for those traits that will allow corals to survive in a climate changing world? I mean, change climate change is natural, but it's at an accelerated rate now. And so we need to jumpstart the natural process of adaptation. And that's called, assisted evolution. And perhaps by identifying which corals in Florida survived this extraordinary event in 2023, we can contribute to the assisted evolution of coral reefs.
That's amazing. And I know you've been involved in a lot of advocacy as well as a lot of impacting policy that even, as a layman I can understand with the Wastewater Management Act and things like that. Is there something that you can, just give Floridians guided action on, and like where to point their energy, because this just feels like something that we can all truly get behind, and is just such a tragedy that it's happening this way.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, there are two levels to work. One is a local level, and that's water quality. And I showed you that at the beginning. We control the water quality of our coastal environment. So things like wastewater upgrade and stormwater, those are all important. Yes, they involve taxpayer dollars, but that's worth voting for. So I would get that word out. And we had tremendous success in the Florida Keys in getting that legislation passed by a very large majority. And Monroe County, Florida, is a conservative voting district. But for them, that was a pocketbook issue that related to the environment, and they were willing to work on it. And then the other way is, of course, advocacy for any kind of climate mitigation, climate strategies. This is important. I mean, the data now show that green energy is actually cheaper than fossil fuel energy. And if you add in the environmental and the health costs of fossil fuels,
Mhm.
green energy is a lot cheaper. Now, Florida, of course, is in the Sun Belt. which means the sun is there for you. It's not like you're in northern Maine. Not that I have anything against New England where you are now, Desiree, but use that, vote for and advocate for green energy. And then I loved what you said about getting the word out. And I'm going to do something here, unabashed promotion.
I love that. There you go.
So, um, 2 years back, I won the Emmy for my contribution to Chasing Corals. And so it's on Netflix now, and I recommend that that everyone look at it, and we can do Q&A with an audience, etc. But I'll tell my story about it. I sat next to Sir David Attenborough at the Emmy ceremony, and I think he was expecting to win for his entry, Blue Planet. But when Chasing Coral won, they said it won for its narrative. The story is that the world is changing and that we have to act. And Faraway helped me act last summer, put me down there where the action was occurring. And now it's imperative that we get back.
Well, it's an honor to work with you. It's an honor to be able to share your message and share the incredible work that you're doing. Thank you to the Volvo Foundation for giving us a platform to be able to share it further. And yeah, just really appreciate you, Dr. Jim Porter.
Thank you.
Absolutely.